All right. So yeah, welcome to this or deep dive into Material 3. Here is the agenda for today. So the first few minutes we'll just spend introducing ourselves and doing some networking. And then we'll spend the bulk of our time diving into Material 3, getting an overview of it and seeing what we can do with it with Flutter. And finally, we'll wrap it up with a Q&A session. Of course, we'll also have our chat open on the right side of your interface. Maybe it's this side, depending on how it's rendering my camera input. So you can always use that to ask questions. Our speaker for today is John Manning. He is a Google developer expert for Flutter and Dart. And John, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm practice clinically as a physician in emergency medicine. I am a GDE. Because I still patients actually took care of patients until 1 a.m. Eastern last night in the apartment in Charlotte. A lot of the things we build are surprise in healthcare, because there's a lot of different ways that you can make cool interfaces. And for a few years, I've been traveling around trying to teach people how to use Flutter to make the designs that we actually want. So that's the overarching of the journey that I've had today.
It's awesome. And just to add to that, as it says here on these slides, John is also one of the main people behind the FHIR FLI collaborative, and it focuses on, as it says, intersection between Flutter and the global standard for healthcare interoperability. And that basically lets you work with healthcare data in a, using with Flutter in a much simpler way than it would have been without Firefly. So thanks, John, for the introduction. Just to plug in a little bit about GDG Chapel Hill, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can join this chapter and follow any updates by visiting this website, gdg.community.dev/GDG Chapel Hill. And you can also join our Discord server, which would be on this page. Here's a bit about me. I'm a software engineer at ShareFile in downtown Raleigh. I mostly work on full stack JavaScript development. So on the front end, I mainly use React with TypeScript. And on the back end, I typically use Node.js. Other than that, I like to dabble with app development, not just Android, but also React Native. And as we are exploring today, Flutter. And I also like playing with AI and ML. All right, so now it's your turn. Anyone who's attending, feel free to chime in and introduce yourself. And you can also drop your LinkedIn in the chat, which I'm going to do right now.
Credit where it's due. The majority of a very, very large part of the effort should go to Gray Falconberry, who's also here, who's also a Flutter developer and a physician. He understands works, which is their interoperability standard, extremely well, and is very interested in backend development and automation so that you don't have to do this stuff over and over again. So thanks, Gray, because people in 7 countries have used Firefly since released 2.5 years ago.
That's awesome. Alrighty then, let's on and get started with the meat of our meeting. Before we do, just a little plug here about this platform that we are using. This is Bevy, and you can use the Q&A tab over here to ask any questions. I'll be monitoring those as John takes you through a journey with Material 3. Over to you, John.
Sure. Uh, Given the here, we can just keep this incredibly low key. So if you have questions, ask. Um, and I'll try and tailor the timing of the talk in it's useful for you as well. So realistically, a lot of what we can do, there's a lot of different ways that we approach some of this session, and frankly, it's I want to be mindful of your time as well. This is me, John Manning. I'm CEO and co-founder of May June, which is a company in the healthcare space, emergency doctor and informatician, and Flutter. If you take a photo with that on your phone, that's my contact info, and with the bit.ly link listed here. We often have disclosures, so a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be discussing is with the where we build applications, but my clinical life, the other side of my emergency medicine experience, is as a teacher and emergency physician at Atrium Health, Carolina. So what we do with May June, we build solutions that advance health and well-being. We specifically focus on user interactions that actually mirror the workflows that we see in healthcare. Like bedside clinical care and informatics, specialty of medicine that you can do from any specialty, health, Medicare and Medicaid. And then we have we've got cloud DevOps engineers, experts in fire, and some people that do all. We've built things to date that open source completely in the pre-hospital space, medics and emergency medicine technicians. We've built things for in-hospital for the American College of Emergency Physicians as an example, and then we build things that use fire and fly, which you led into, help with multilingual screening of social care. We love Dart, we love Flutter, and after having it back in December 2018 when it was first released, I've been developing in Dart ever since, and please come to the Dart side if you've not, because it is way worth the time and to expand on that space. This is a GDG. So if you've not heard about Flutter, I'll just give a quick one or two liner. It is the open source user interface kit by Google that you can build applications for any screen, Android, iOS, web, Mac, PC, Linux. So any screen where you can have a platform, you can build a cross-platform application in Flutter. It's in place now in the last 3.5 years. It's in the New York Times app. It's in Toyota's a lot of as well. This is a slightly older slide because it's now over 700,000 apps. But I love the fact that most developers love it. Now the third largest repository on GitHub, which is, or by number of contributors, which also speaks to its impact. So, there's a lot of ways that you can learn how to get started with Flutter. One of the things that as a clinician, I go to clinical conferences or health conferences, and I teach people how to get started and actually build in live real time while explaining a lot of the concepts together as well. But YouTube video, flutter.dev, there's a lot of different ways that you can get started. We also are very focused on, both inside Flutter and a lot of the things that we do in healthcare, of just building upon the shoulders of others, and interoperable and scalable. So the analogy that with Flutter as a declarative style of programming as compared to imperative. You say, go to the store and get some milk, it comes back with milk, rather than having to label along your journey. Go inside, get a shopping cart, go to aisle 6, grab go to the aisle to pay. It's way too much. And a lot of people, another good example, can drive a car, but you don't necessarily have to know all the intricacies of spark plugs and piston engines, combustion, to drive. And that's one of the heavy strengths about Flutter, and because it's all open source, you can hit Control or Command click and go all the way down, see how all this stuff is under the hood, but you don't have to. And if you want ideas as you're cleaning up code and learning, best practices with development and things along those lines, it really behooves you to kind of go into in depth in that space. Start with widgets. The majority of what we're going to discuss is material design, and I want to keep this as an interactive part. Ask questions in the chat. If there's a specific thing you want to see, we'll cover it. A lot of elements of material design 2 are still available, and there's some UI changes pertinent for material design 3. And the benefit of Flutter is literally if you need to go from 2 to 3, you just say use true and you're done. That's it. That's the spoiler of this whole talk. I'm leaving these slides up. This is have those resources. I'll just now, if you were only to look at one resource at all for Material 3, just go to 3.material.io. And a lot of the stuff that we're going to cover comes directly from there. And it's really, for the majority of what we need to cover, at least from this perspective, it makes sense to be very and then apply it when it makes sense. It's the next high single resource that you could look at comes from developer.android.com, because they have an entire page with one single, just in the page, you can see here's what it looks like in Material 3, what you need to keep in mind as things are changing. And then CodeMagic has a nice covers this as well. So realistically, if you only have 3 resources, just look at the material.io. And rather than go in depth on every single element of Material 3, I just want to cover the 3 aspects that I think that are the most pertinent for what we're going to build. And we'll go into depth at least a little bit to see how that actually within a Flutter application. So color, typography, and shape are, I'll say, probably the most visually striking changes that you'll notice with Material 3. And look at the way that a Material 2 application were done. Typically would have a primary variant, then a and secondary variant, surface, on primary, secondary, on background, on surface. That's it. That is all you had. And that's great if you have 4 colors and that's all you need. But if you're building an application you want to look clean, you would either have to put your own custom style, or nowadays use color extensions to add to the process to make it essentially having your own. Or if you want to just set a color single widget that you're doing, you definitely can. No one's going to stop you. Certainly if you're getting started, feel free. But if you want to make a production application, it makes sense to embed everything into your theme. What heavily with regards to Material 3 is now have a primary and on primary, a secondary on secondary, tertiary, error on error, primary container, secondary container on second container. And it's a lot more, it's more colors, but it also makes a lot of sense when you're trying to keep the end of something, but you don't want to go too far together. And I'll say, just kind of thinking through how we at Meijun approached when we built everything, we built a lot of Material 2. We transitioned our applications into Material 3. Previously, when we were doing the themes for 2, we had primary, secondary, the variant, the background of the surface set, and then everything else was its own uniquely defined color. And that was fine, but confusing when you're questioning which of these do I need to do? Did I label it correctly? Is everything going the right way? And importantly, the versus dark text and something that is on top of that routinely set. So the fact that we actually have now a more clear delineation of color, here container, here's what's on that container, makes your life much, much, especially if you're building things that require, well, I'll just say some form of science, because if you want something that's text on a color scheme and you want it to be AA or AAA compliant, you should be very mindful of which you're actually putting on that specific background. I can go in depth on color. Certainly, when we're talking about color schemes, there's cool ways and very interesting tools that you can use from this. But I think there, at least for now. I want this to be useful for you, and certainly we can show this stuff as well. And I think over time it probably makes sense to show some of this part. But essentially, there is a material theme builder that you can go to. I'll just show you. m3.material.io. And this is the and you can get to anywhere under this material IO, but if you just Google the theme builder, you can see that as well. You can set any custom that you would like, and actually what I'm going to do is make this part here so you can just pick a color, see what it looks like in light mode, dark mode, find something that you think is useful for you, and it will give you essentially what that looks like in real time with all of the material widgets right there. So this is all you can add to your cut, like your secondary color scheme as well. You can see, like, you can do this for your color scheme. And a nice way to get started at the very beginning. And then all you have to do is just say export to flutter.dart, and it'll give you a zip file that you can download and copy it in, and you're done. If you need more customization of what other elements actually look like, there's a lot of different ways to do that. If you were who is uses different tools, like within Figma is a good example, what you can do is you actually can go to, and I'll just show you from material design. If you go to, m3.material.io, scroll down, there's a new Figma design for Material 3. If you click the link, Figma, copy this over directly into your Figma assets and what that looks like is you have this getting started page. It will walk you through everything you can do. You can go into styles. You can see essentially what it looks like with the different typography, colors, elements, breakpoints, and various components that are relevant for Figma. This is really, really useful if you are focused on the design element. Well, where you can just say Material 3 Builder. If you're in Figma, it's under Plugins, Material 3 Builder. And you can do something similar to what I showed on the web instance. And then you can sort everything out as well, which takes a little bit of time. But that will essentially get you a Dart class. This is good. I think if you're just getting started, go through the website. Specifically, this, if you need to add color extensions. You can add them, you can name them whatever you, and you can pick whatever colors you need for this. You can even do a thing called harmonize, which kind of makes it try to match colors. And then you just click export. You have a class of all part of your theme and these extended colors, and it'll show you those color extensions, and you just move on. That's what I would say if you're just now getting started. If you want to go in a little bit more depth or make sure you don't have to set every single thing by hand, there's a few ways you can get around that, and we'll do that with a little bit of live coding as well. So that's actually material theme, and the way that you're able to use both the theme builder from the web instance as well as the Figma plugin to get some color schemes set up, and then to add that directly into Flutter code.
Hey, John, can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So, since there's just a couple people here, I'm going to ask something kind of major and related. So currently, the way we do themes is there's a package called JSON theme, where we have a JSON file where we specify the colors for kind of all these, and it takes it in as a JSON file and creates the theme. We did that partially to make it easier to change from client to client so that they could put their own colors and themes on it. Now that this sort of thing is available from like the sites that you showed, do you think that is probably a better way to do it so that the client can kind of see what it looks like and then just export the code directly instead of using the JSON? Or is there a benefit to using a JSON file to specify all of these?
I stick with where we currently have, and the reason why I say that is we essentially, one of the benefits of this, and I'll let you see what it looks like whenever I export it. I'm not sure why it not, but hopefully this will export. If not, then I'll export it from the Figma file. But when you actually export, essentially the downside is, when we were building stuff originally, everything was, every single aspect of what you had was set. And the problem with that is if I need to make one change, like I have to be very focused on, let's say primary, but you don't like primary container and on primary container, or maybe you want this one to be a slightly different color or this one to be a slightly different color. And so if you're doing this, the problem comes to you have to essentially be a generated file within VS Code. But here. So if I'm opening this directly into, so after I've downloaded this, I clicked the export button, this saved this to the downloads folder, and now I've just opened, just so you can see what the color schemes look like. Is set, and it's painful to change. Rather, my suggestion, and kind of as we, there's a pub.dev package. So if you and you go to Flex Seed, there's Flex Color Scheme and then Flex Seed Scheme, and this from Seed is actually what we use, so that I only have to set one to at most 3 or 4 full seeds, and then all of these different type of colors that are on one single thing that I set are done. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to change 100 different files or 100 different I only need to overwrite 1 or 2 of them. So the cleaner way to do this, I think, is if you're just getting started, use this, export it, move on. But if you need to have a little bit more nuanced control, then I would suggest doing essentially that this does, which is a from seed, and then manually override one or two things. And I think that's really important. Again, at the very beginning, when we were first building everything, we didn't have any of this. So we were setting these colors custom in our application. Now the fact that you actually have this benefit of having a specifically set extension and is really, really helpful. Having to manually set your entire light color scheme, your entire dark color scheme, and remember, did I change primary first, like on primary container, correct? Was it for the dark mode on primary container? That's not worth your time. Just look at a seed.
Nice.
Thinking some of the other elements that are important for Material 3 is typography. And if you're building Flutter applications today, and you pull in something from your theme within Flutter, you can still use H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, which is all that you're used to if you ever build anything in Markdown or you do any web-based development. But really the proper way is now with display, headline, title, body, and label. And it's not quite a one-to-one conversion when you think of Material 2 over to Material 3, but it's, and frankly, I'll always forget, which is display come before headline. So I'll just look it up, or you just test it and see if it works, and if it matches the screen size that you're looking for, move on. What that essentially looks like, and over here was all the Material 2 stuff, and over here is all the Material 3. For every one of these slides in the notes, I actually keep a direct link so that you can see where this came from, and a lot of this came from those three before. But essentially, the slight changes in terms of like which ones are bold or things along those lines, and you can overwrite any one of these elements as well as you're working through your theme. And if you think of it, what that actively looks like in a specific or iPhone Flutter application, so a phone form factor application, headline, XSP, useful. And so at the minimum, kind of starting with this makes a lot of sense. But when you end up building, if you're building for multi-platform, something that'll work on Mac, Linux, and all of the variations of web as going from a large form factor down, then certainly you can manually override some of this stuff, either just or adjusting for a specific, I want it to look like this for Mac or something like that. But I think it makes a lot of sense to just have everything in one location, and then the last big thing that is at least Material 3 is shape. And what I'll also mention when you think through some of the shapes, previously there was only 3 versions, and you had some things that were in this form factor one, some that were here, and some that was here. And the concept of elevation, which is not directly, but it's close enough to at least consider, almost always had some form of shadow to make something feel like it's visually being elevated off of the page. So from Material 1 that I had carried over. And instead of large, they added some extra small, extra large, and the whole range of sizes is a little bit different. And the concept of where something is on top of higher off the page actually will also, you don't just have to use a shadow to get that point across. And when you go through some of the material, it'll actually visually show you how that will look and how you can have those, like usually whenever you have like a slider and the stuff that's below it just have a different color, where you can actually use the same primary color that you've set to get the point across that this is visually distinct. So just so that you can see what it looks like from material 2 into material 3, you set primary, secondary, etc. for your floating action button, and it's no longer just that one single circle. You could always over. I think that's really important to keep in mind. Your buttons also aren't quite as square, and they'll interact a little bit differently. And the chips are a little bit more. They follow a little bit more with this concept of elevation and actually bringing in some of the theme. So with that in mind, the big three, and understanding that there's only a handful of us, I'm happy to go into more or less detail on some of these elements. Are there any questions, at least in terms of some of these parts so far? And if not, then that's totally fine. So what I would like to show is going to be, I'm going to show at least some elements just so that you can see what that visual change is from material 2 into material 3. And then we'll end up doing a little bit of live coding. If there's a specific thing that you want me to cover, then certainly I can. And then we'll just open it up for additional questions and we can go from there. Are in, so the GitHub is flutter.com. I'm sorry, github.com/flutter/samples. There's a material in here where you can actually get down and see a lot of their specific form factors as well as how they together. And that's this easiest way that you can kind of get yourself started and see what that code looks like, and see what their recommended styles are as well. But to show you that actual web, you can essentially go, you can adjust between bright and dark mode. You can individually set a C color, which is pretty useful. And then you can see what it will look like in material 2 as compared to material 3. And all of these buttons, sliders are pretty easy to kind of work your way down. And that includes like stack bars, bottom sheets. So I can see what this looks like in material 2 as compared to material 3. So this link right here, you're trying to figure out what your actual style will be, is very, very useful, especially if you're first getting started through all of this. And if you want to see what this looks like on a phone factor, you just make everything smaller, and then you can kind of go from there as well. So this is, if you're just looking at, this is where I would start, and this is where I would, and we see these different colors for the different levels of elevation like I was talking about from earlier. So if I make something 2, it was only here, it was only the amount of shadow that you had. Back over to material 3, it was both shadow as well as the opacification of your primary color that would determine how much something was elevated. And so I think it looks a lot cleaner. If you have the chance, you're building a new application, just go ahead and switch to material 3. My suggestion. So let's just get into this a little bit. We'll do a little bit of here, and we'll kind of go from there. So one of the things that you all can't see my text, please let me know. One of the things that I like to do whenever you're just scratch is what I'll essentially do Flutter create. And if you're ever creating application, I would specifically suggest putting in your organization name, because that will set unique ID, your app ID for Android and iOS at the outset, com.example, and you never have to write it again. Whereas if you don't do this, whenever you do Flutter create in terminal or command line prompt, then it becomes a little bit more painful. It's not terrible, but it's helpful. You want your package to be called. 3 demo. It says we're all ready. And I will just open this up in VS. I'm trying to make everything so that you can see this. What we'll do is code material 3 demo. There we go. That's exactly where we are. The next thing that I do is if I'm building an application from scratch in Flutter, what I want to do is I like Command-Shift-P, emulator. Let's go ahead and start with iOS. It's over to the side. And we'll go ahead and see if so run in file. And this has your very basic that you can get things going. The version of Flutter is great, but if you've made, I'll just say, a lot of applications in Flutter and you're tired of all the comments and you want to get rid of them quickly, at least in VS, you can do is if you hit Command D, you can select multiple things. Command Shift will select them all. And then I'm pressing Command Shift and to the right a couple of times, which selects all text for these and deletes this. And hit save. And essentially now I have my Hello World application without any of this extra text at all. So that's pretty useful. I also, in the file, same thing. If you've not built a lot of Flutter applications, this is really useful. But if you've done this a lot, Shift L, pressed Command Shift and to the right a couple of times, press delete. And then I'll press the reverse of delete. And then that's function backspace. And then essentially all I have to do is make sure that everything is just matched up a little bit. I have a much cleaner Hello World application that I can use to get everything started. If I had some packages, I can. And if I need to change, for example, this color scheme from blue to green, you can just see all this stuff happen in real time. That is creating something from scratch. This is usually how I'll do that. That I like to cover at the very beginning also is, if this is the first time you've done a lot of Flutter applications, and for the others that in this conversation, it's helpful if you kind of list in the chat, if you're used to a lot of this Flutter stuff, if you're a beginner, intermediate, expert, because the amount that I'm going to cover in real time will be different. So I'm happy to adjust this based on your needs, but we're specific theme. And I'll just tell you right now, if you don't have a theme set up, it will default to this blue theme. And frankly, when you're thinking, how do I get from this regular theme into material theme, it is literally use material 3 true. Save, everything is now shifted to that new theme. That's all I have to care about. So again, the spoiler of how do we get from material 2 to material, really just that. If you are using material 3, you should, I'm sure you've noticed that this primary color is not there anymore. Realistically, the is, well, this primary swatch, is this well? And the answer is no. And so if you're actually building something here, then this is where that flex seed scheme is really, really useful. And Gray had actually asked this question from earlier about, do you just copy in all of the class that you have from that other color scheme, or can you actually use something that's a little bit different? That we did for our clients, they had very clearly defined, somewhat more rigid color schemes. And if I was only putting in their recommended scheme in, for example, this Figma file, and I put their color choice, the seed that this would generate actually would not match their color choice. From this range is a very different range than here versus here, and you can see it a lot better on the web instance of this, which I think I still have right here. So if I set this color primary to adjust on, like, I want it to be exactly this color, and I adjust that chroma, none of the dark scheme is actually going to map. The primary container is a little bit different, and there are, this is literally only changing that one color and nothing in between. Same thing if I like my secondary scheme, it's really, really hard to get. I chose this lighter, and if you see, this is the darker color that it automatically picked for me, and this color doesn't even match it anyways. And just to prove that, I'll just show you one of the things that I like to do is I use Sketch personally, just to quickly see, all right, this color F620FF, this is a whole different one. So even if I'm saying, all right, I'm going to set this as my color, nothing here matches that. And so that's really important, using out of the box changes. And so that is, that's why we were using the flex seed scheme to begin with. And then manually override a few of the scheme and then dark scheme essentially seeded colors to match what we were needing for our clients. And I'll just show you that if I go into and I want to add this flex seed scheme, I can do that pretty easily. So I'll just go to pub.dev here. I'll bring this web page over. And I can either click this and copy this latest version into here, or what I can also do is I can just do Command-Shift-P, add dependency. And there's flex. And this will actually find that same version and put it right here into my pub/spec. And so now if I want my color scheme to be from a specific, I'll say seed color scheme dot, and I'll set a primary key of, you know what, while we're at it, let's just get this one. So that one is F620FF, sure. Color and a 0xAARRGGBB. So that's one way that you can use this. The benefit of Flutter is that you can just hold over and it will tell you exactly. So I'm going to say 0xFF, and then I totally forgot what we were using. So give me a second. F, okay. F620FF. Let's see what happens. All right. In retrospect, I realize probably isn't visually striking as enough that you'd want to be able to compare that to another. Just go ahead and change color. One of the things that you can do within VS Code is you can just click up here at the top and then adjust a different color and then press save. And now you'll see it's now updated into green. This no longer needed. Now we essentially can use our own color scheme. And if we want there to be a primary key, a secondary key, let's just adjust this to secondary key, also a tertiary key, and we want to essentially be red. We'll make that just so that it looks the same. Same with this one as well. You can just click through this, or you can go to any of the design tools that you like. And that is how you would set up to begin with. That is a very big difference between I'm going to show you a feature and how that's important versus level code, and this is how we went to make everything, as extensible as we can for what is a white label application that can be themed, branded in a number of different ways. But this was essentially our start. Is at the very beginning, we're using a seed color scheme, and if you don't have a seed set up for the primary key, you'll default to our for primary. Same for secondary, same for tertiary. And with this seed color scheme from seeds, you can manually override any of the individual colors. So for example, this should be primary, and if I adjust this to primary, and I'll make dot, I don't know, let's just make it amber. In theory, this should also update as well, which of course it's not. So that's great. Let's try it. Let's see if it's primary container. So realistically, you can set a seed. You can manually override any one of the very high number of colors that you would have, and then you just move on. This is to Grace point. We actually use JSON data for this. We have other things that we import with JSON data, and that way we just have one segment that is unique and specific for each client. And I mentioned application. We call this questionario, but we've built and themed for different clients that have been used clinically, and each one has their own brand. One has their own translations, each one has their own content, and each one has their own color scheme. But the overlying architecture is the same. So this is really, really cool. It's I think one of my favorite things about working around with Flutter applications is you can just extend all of this and certainly build from there. Kind of moving on to this specific theme data, I'm going to at least just cover light mode and dark mode. And I'll tell you that if you want so if I want to set this brightness, like I would be used to doing, you can set a manual flag into this, set it so that this button would actually change a variable from brightness.light to brightness.dark, or you can use other statement set this up, and a lot of different ways you can go down into different layers of sophistication for a production level app. But again, at the very beginning, just getting started, set this to brightness.dark, and I've not set this for my color scheme. This should break, which it does. So basically what that means is if I'm setting one for my theme data and I'm setting a color like an actual theme from the seed, defaults to brightness.light. Manually setting this one, they're different. Everything is gonna fail. So one way that I could get around this, hot restart, I can, that yellow looks too, there we go. I can essentially change this so that both of them say brightness.dark. The next level of sophistication is I would just say const brightness dark. And then these two elements with a single constant variable, which is actually the same, but then that means that I only have one variable as I'm going from one section to the other, and then you can kind of work your way down. So, when you're thinking through how the next elements will be, you'll take that and then extract that into management tool will be, and that is how you can at least start with seeds. You can see what this will look like for all those various locations right from there. The next aspect that I'm going to cover, at least for now, is going to be some of the various floating action themes or the various themes. So we can a lot of cool things. You start have a color scheme and you have that as its own as its, and eventually bring that in where you'll have like, if I need to change some of the text, or if I need to make something along those lines, literally all I have to do is kind of down. So again, if I want to change the shape for this as a good example, so I'll adjust the shape, hover over, it'll actually tell you exactly what you need as a good example. Or if you're in and you actually want to see these documents and kind of like figure what, like for the actual cookbook or the tutorials, and you want to set these yourself, then you can always just kind of work your way from there. There's a lot that you can learn Flutter. I'll just search for floating action button right here, material library, and then you can just click, and it will even tell you a nice video. It will show you what's there. It will even tell you all of the different aspects that directly override, which is really, really useful. So if I, for example, said border with a decorated box, and it can take a rounded rectangular border or a circle border. So I don't like the square part and I want this to be a circle border. And if I want it to just look like that, now and if you have everything extracted out into your theme, a lot more useful, so that as you have multiple elements within your application, one theme and that's it, and everything else actually be dependent on that. That's where this becomes really helpful. So ultimately, I think the point of what we can do now with material theme, how we can extend from this, and how we can essentially build things further and further become a lot more helpful as you on different levels of sophistication. I'll mention here that you can see this because I think this is pretty helpful. Application that we had built in the completely open source space, MIT licensed. Fair warning, it's several years old. It is before Material 3. And this was before, Material 2 content. It's fired in as my GitHub /prepare the ARE, and our when you go into the lib folder and UI and you look at our themes, and that's that we had, we got a lot of inspiration from Skinner, and we leave some of the various links and things like that. But originally the way that we had to do this is we had to individually name each single color, give ourselves comments of this is what it's used for, this is what it is, why it's helpful. And then we would essentially set our own headline down, and then we would within the theme itself as its own default constructor, got our inspiration, providing comments and credit where it's due. We would individually set up our light and dark mode, and then once we had our specific color scheme, we would just do dot copy with, and then we would essentially pull in all of and if you're overriding your floating action button or if you're overriding something else, this is how we would. That's as we were going through this, what we've done today, different, and I'll just say very different compared to what we had done before. Is there's a lot of overlap in terms of some of the elements, and I'll just show you this part. If you look at right here, we'll still pull in, dark mode, and we'll essentially whether or not we're actually getting the color scheme and an extension on top of that. And so if you're using a set class to have your extension, have that, and then you can essentially set those parts up as well. But then we'll data.from, we'll set our text theme in a similar way, we'll have our color scheme, and then just copy. And then here's the stuff that sets your app bar theme so that you can customize it to your own. Here's the stuff that sets your typography, selection, your floating action button. And so that is essentially how we still bring in as one class all of the stuff for light mode and dark mode, so that when you're thinking through this, I want everything to be looks connected to this color in the light scheme, and that it's connected to this color whenever you transit. You don't have to care about any of it. I have my own extension for, a notification as a good example, and it's different. My primary, secondary, or tertiary color, because I'm using other stuff, use it as an extension. So you have notifications as an extension, on notification, notification container, and on notification container. And then you just set it and you move on. So there's only a handful, and I don't want to do too much in terms of live coding as compared to, the elements that I think are really useful. I'll kind of leave it as there in terms of just some of the elements that we're now. If you have questions, please feel free, and I'll happily go into more depth, or we can kind of cover a little bit more of what it's like to actually manually import various color schemes or typography. You can set the states, for a material state property or things along those lines. But I feel like that's a little bit, it's an easy way to get into the weeds. So I'll end, at least right now, with just a quick about some of the other things that we do that are heavily in the open source space. We built Firefly, you had referenced as well. This is 10 lines of open source code that we provide as our service to the community and to the globe. Some of these applications that I mentioned that we built as our white label application have been recognized by a group that's working for social need and social determinants of health, government organization called the Administration for Community Living. We were in a 2.5 long challenge that built from Prepare, code that I mentioned from earlier. We actually have a Slack channel with members across the globe. We have a lot of instructions. We're very interested in specifically Flutter for care. There's a lot of nuances that you have to keep in mind in terms of security, in terms of making sure that you're connecting to the right. You can't just use Firebase and Cloud Firestore. Healthcare data is it's its own entity in terms of how everything gets structured, and that's what we try to cover with Firefly as a whole, as well as our Slack group. And to date, we use ourselves. This is how we are using it, but it's been used by developers across the globe: the USA, Canada, Germany, Italy, India, and Argentina. So if you are interested in collaborating in the healthcare space, please feel free to reach out. And realistically, there's so many things that we can do in Material 3, but just keeping things very level, at least for now. I want to thank you all for your time, and I'll happily answer questions.
There's no applause emojis.
I know, right? If only.
All right. Looks like that's a wrap. First off, thank you so much, John, for doing this event. It's been great to have you. And if anyone attending would like, you could visit this link, tiny.cc/GDG feedback, and that will take you to a very quick, short feedback form. It just has a couple of multiple choice questions, but that would help us figure out future events and any suggestions that you might have to make events better. So I'll keep this on here for 5 or 10 seconds. And all right. So yeah, just plugging our upcoming events. So a couple weeks from now, we are going to be doing an event around generative AI. And Henry Ruiz, who's a PhD candidate at Texas A&M University, will be speaking about it. It will be mainly geared towards how you as a developer or engineer can harness the power of all of these new AI tools that have been popping up. So stay tuned for that event. The post for it would be out soon. And once again, thank you, John. Thank you, Gray and Thomas, for attending. Thank you, everyone else who's watching from YouTube online. See you next time.